Okay. I'm using Restream, and will be going to 6 different spots. Um, this is just my way of toying around to see who's actually awake at this hour and who's uh, who's up for listening to a good book. Boom, 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 boom. I've got the messages disappearing after about 15 seconds. That's just in case some dummy comes in and tries to spoil it for those that haven't read the 100-year-old book. Okay. Let's grow together, bro. Thank you, Lily. I'm sure that's a bot, but that's fine. Can't do anything about that. Um, don't call me bro. Okay, let's see. We're starting with chapter 13 today. Um, and I think where it left off was, let's see. Oh, this is where Poirot is. Basically, we left off with Poirot appealing to everybody who's sitting at the table. He's kind of being dramatic, saying that this could be his last case ever. And he was begging for compliments a little bit by saying, I'm not as good as I used to be, that kind of thing. But um, so anyway, they're all in the room and they've all got something to hide. Classic Agatha Christie. And so what we're going to do is we're going to just give a few more minutes for people to jump in. And in the meantime, feel free to say hi. Feel free to text or type a question, whatever you want to do. I'm still working on the layout a little bit. And I'm thinking about getting the fireplace going one of these streams. You know, I mean, I've got all this. It's LA, so I can't go and chop a tree down. So I got all this firewood. But I think I need like a comfy chair to sit in front of the fire. A close friend said that I should model it after, Masterpiece Theater or something like that. And that makes sense. Why not? But I think that means I need a smoking jacket. So, I don't know. The categories on TikTok kind of suck. You have your choice of chat and interview or education. I don't really feel like I'm educating people if I'm reading them a book. So I'm going to go with chat and interview. And hey, if you want to fall asleep while I'm reading this, go right ahead. There will be no shame in that whatsoever. But this is and a pipe. Yes, thank you. Oh, that's a great idea. Maybe one that blows bubbles. That's really good. I hadn't even thought of that. I'm sure I could find something like that on eBay or whatever. That would be pretty good. How you doing, Catherine? I'm just gonna fix my stuff here so that I can sit up proper. I need to back away from the screen just a little. So I'm using Restream, and there is maybe just a little bit of a delay, so I don't want anybody to think that I'm ignoring them. Um, just might take 20 seconds or more for me to see your comment and respond. And while I'm reading, I'm doing my best to keep my peripheral vision up. Oh, you went to a Cardinals game? Nice. I'm assuming at Busch, right? Who'd they play? Also, what kind of weather did you have? I love that new Busch Stadium. I'm not going to lie. I mean, I miss the old one just out of nostalgia's sake, but the new one's so good. I say new, it's been around for 18 years, but um, oh, they played the Phillies. Okay. Right on. Just making sure the comments last about 10, 15 seconds and then they disappear. Weather was good. Oh, good. I was at work. I work with some friends that make photography film, and great company, Cinestill Film. And I was explaining to my coworkers that were born and raised in LA, what Missouri weather was like. And I tell you, if I could take people from LA to have them witness a good old-fashioned lightning storm, oh, that would be cool. Oh, of course we won. Who pitched? Who was the starter? I forgot that was going. Man, I'm a bad fan. Do the Phillies still have Bryce Harper? I can't remember. So we're currently streaming now to Facebook, um, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitch, and TikTok. Scott Gray. Yeah, I'm not familiar with Scott Gray. Just going to text a buddy of mine that I'm getting ready to read. Scott Gray. I knew a Scott Gray once when I was an engineer. Well, we're getting to be 5 minutes away from getting started. I'm glad. I guess my audio is working okay. If you can hear me, these are very humble beginnings with this idea about reading public domain books online, and I'm strictly doing it for fun and practice. So. We'll I swear if I get a regular crowd of like 20 people over time, that would be so great. I think, I don't know, helping people go to sleep. Yeah. Might need to get a new chair though. This thing's creaky. And if I thought about getting, like I said, getting the fireplace going, and if I do, then I'll put the chair in front of the fireplace. Like put it like right here, and then get the microphone over here, you know, and have a lamp like Cookie Monster did in Monster Piece Theater as Alistair Cookie. All right, let's see here. So I always start the Instagram and the TikTok last because of two reasons. TikTok gives you a lot of followers right in the beginning, so I want to be reading when I do that. And Instagram only gives you an hour before they cut you off hard. I mean, just like you get no warning, you're done. I found that out the hard way a couple of times. So, but yeah, that's that's the purpose for doing it regularly, is to learn. So let's see here, getting on the old. Okay. Well, I think we can at least get the other streams going here. Create live video. Add the murder of Roger Ackroyd. He is like super dead. Copy stream key. Edit settings. There's so many things you got to click. Save. What was the score, Catherine? I'm reading 2 chapters a night. If fine with Agatha Christie, I can do 2 chapters in just under an hour. It's amazing how she wrote it that way. Maybe the editor did that. I don't know. I don't know if did you have editors back then, but anyway. So 2 chapters an evening. Okay, let's see if we can get Instagram fired up. There I am. Not very great quality stream video, but anyway, we'll go live there. And then we'll start up the old TikTok. And then we'll get to it. And I'll hope that I haven't screwed something up. But if I have, that's not the end of the world. Okay. All right, let's get started. Chapter 13 of The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. Sorry, I got a funny message from my buddy. All right. Little sound check. Can everybody hear me okay? I assume you can. And let's get into it. Chapter 13, The Goose Quill. Go Cardinals. Thanks, Caroline. I appreciate it. Caroline's on Instagram. Let me know that my voice was good. I sure do appreciate it. Thank you. And here we go. That evening, at Poirot's request, I went over to his house after dinner. Caroline saw me depart with visible reluctance. I think she would have liked to have accompanied me. Poirot greeted me hospitably. He had placed a bottle of Irish whiskey, which I detest, on a small table, with a soda water siphon and a glass. He himself was engaged in brewing hot chocolate. It was a favorite beverage of his, I discovered later. He inquired politely after my sister, whom he declared to be a most interesting woman. I'm afraid you've given her a swelled head, I said dryly. What about Sunday afternoon? He laughed and twinkled. I always like to employ the expert, he remarked obscurely, but he refused to explain the remark. You got all the local gossip anyway, I remarked, true and untrue, and a great deal of valuable information, he added quietly. Such as? He shook his head. Why not have told me the truth, he countered. In a place like this, all Ralph Patton's doings were bound to be known. If your sister had not happened to pass through the wood that day, somebody else would have done so. Oh, thanks, Catherine. I suppose they would, I said grumpily. What about this interest of yours in my patients? Again he twinkled. Only one of them, doctor, only one of them. The last? I hazarded. I find Miss Russell a study that is most interesting, he said evasively. Do you agree with my sister and Mrs. Ackroyd that there's something fishy about her? I asked. Eh? What do you say? Fishy? I explained fishy to the best of my ability. And they say that, do they? Didn't my sister convey as much to you yesterday afternoon? C'est possible. Well, I'm getting better at French. It's possible. For no reason whatever, I declared. Les femmes, generalized Poirot. They are marvelous. They invent haphazard, and by miracle they are right. Not that it is that really. Women observe subconsciously 1,000 little details, without knowing that they are doing so. Their subconscious minds add these little things together, and they can call the result intuition. Me, I am very skilled in psychology. I know these things. He swelled his chest out importantly, looking so ridiculous that I found it difficult not to burst out laughing. Then he took a small sip of his chocolate and carefully wiped his mustache. I wish you'd tell me, I burst out, what you really think of it all. He put down his cup. You wish that? I do. You have seen what I have seen. Should not our ideas be the same? I'm afraid you're laughing at me, I said stiffly. Of course I have no experience of matters of this kind. Poirot smiled at me indulgently. You are like the little child who wants to know the way how the engine works. You wish to see the affair, not as the family doctor sees it, but with the eye of the detective, who knows and cares for no one, to whom they are all strangers and all equally liable to suspicion. You put it very well, I said. So I give you, then, a little lecture. The first thing is to get a clear history of what happens that evening, always bearing in mind that the person who speaks may be lying. I raised my eyebrows. Rather a suspicious attitude, but necessary, I assure you, necessary. Now first, Dr. Shepherd leaves the house at 10 minutes to 9. How do you know that? Because I told you so. But you might not be speaking the truth, or the watch you went by might be wrong. But Parker also says that you left the house at 10 minutes to 9, so we accept that statement and pass on. At 9 o'clock you run into a man, and here we come to what we will call the romance of the mysterious stranger, just outside the park gates. How do I know that is so? I told you so, I began again, but Poirot interrupted me with a gesture of impatience. Ah! But it is that. You are a little stupid tonight, my friend. You know that is so. You know that it is so. But how am I to know? Bien. I am able to tell you that the mysterious stranger was not a hallucination on your part, because the maid of Miss Gannett met him a few minutes before you did, and of her to be inquired the way to Fernley Park. We accept his presence, therefore, and we can be fairly sure of two things about him: that he was a stranger to the neighborhood, and that whatever his objective in going to Fernley, there was no great secrecy about it, since he twice asked for the way there. Yes, I said, I see that. Now I have made it my business to find out more about this man. He had a drink at the Three Boars, I learned, and the barmaid there says that he spoke with an American accent, and mentioned having just come over from the States. Did it strike you that he had an American accent? Yes, I think he had, I said after a minute or two. during which I cast my mind back. But a very slight one. Precisamente. That's French. There is also this which you will remember I picked up in the summer house. He held out to me the little quill. I looked at it curiously. Then a memory of something I had read stirred in me. Poirot, who had been watching my face, nodded. Yes, heroin snow. Drug takers carry it like this and sniff it up the nose. Diamorphine hydrochloride, I murmured mechanically. This method of taking the drug is very common on the other side. Another proof, if we wanted one, that man came from Canada or the States. That's funny. What first attracted your attention to the summer house? I asked curiously. My frenzy inspector took it for granted, and anyone using that path did so as a shortcut to the house. But as soon as I saw the summer house, I realized that the same path would be taken by anyone using the summer house as a rendezvous. Now it seems fairly certain that the stranger came neither to the front nor to the back door. Then did someone from the house go out and meet him? If so, what could be more convenient place than the little summer house? I searched it with the hope that I might find some clue inside. I found two, the scrap of cambric and the quill. And the scrap of cambric? I asked curiously. What about that? Poirot raised his eyebrows. You do not use your little gray cells, he remarked dryly. The scrap of starched cambric should be obvious. Not very obvious to me, I changed the subject. Anyway, I said this man went to the summer house to meet somebody. Who was that somebody? Exactly the question, said Poirot. You will remember that Mrs. Ackroyd and her daughter came over from Canada to live here. Is that what you meant today when you accused them of hiding the truth? Perhaps. Now another point. What did you think of the parlour-maid story? What story? The story of her dismissal. Does it take half an hour to dismiss a servant? Was the story of those papers a likely one? And remember, though she says she was in her bedroom from 9:30 until 10 o'clock, there is no one to confirm her statement. You bewilder me, I said. To me it grows clearer. But tell me now your own ideas and the theories. I drew a piece of paper from my pocket. I just scribbled down a few suggestions, I said apologetically. But excellent. You have method. Let us hear them. I read out in a somewhat embarrassed voice. To begin with, one must look at the thing logically. Just what my poor Hastings used to say, interrupted Poirot, but alas, he never did so. Point number 1, Mr. Ackroyd was heard talking to someone at 9:30. Point number 2, at some time during the evening, Ralph Patton must have come in through the window, as evidenced by the print of his shoes. Point number 3, Mr. Ackroyd was nervous that evening, and would only have admitted someone had he admitted such to someone he knew. Point number 4, the person with Mr. Ackroyd at 9:30 was asking for money. We know Ralph Patton was in a scrape. These 4 points go to show that the person with Mr. Ackroyd at 9:30 was Ralph Patton, but we know that Mr. Ackroyd was alive at 9:45. Therefore, it was not Ralph who killed him. Ralph left the window open. Afterwards, the murderer came in that way. He had an epiphany. Yes, fancy map. Thanks, Jess. I even have a little blue square for where they're standing, although I neglect to use it. The American stranger, he may have been in league with Parker. And possibly in Parker we have the man who blackmailed Mrs. Ferrars. If so, Parker may have heard enough to realize the game was up, have told his accomplice so, and the latter did the crime with the dagger which Parker gave him. It is a theory, that, admitted Poirot. Decidedly, you have cells of a kind, but it leaves a good deal unaccounted for. Such as? The telephone call, the pushed-out chair. Do you really think the latter that important? I interrupted. Perhaps not, admitted my friend. It may have been pulled out by accident, and Raymond or Blunt may have shoved it into place unconsciously under the stress of emotion. Then there is the missing 40 pounds. Given by Ackroyd to Ralph, I suggested. He may have reconsidered his first refusal. That still leaves one thing unexplained. What? Why was Blunt so certain in his own mind that it was Raymond with Mr. Ackroyd at 9:30? He explained that, I said. Do you think so? I will not press the point. Tell me, instead, what were Ralph Patton's reasons for disappearing? That's rather more difficult, I said slowly. Or not slowly. I shall have to speak as a medical man. Ralph's nerves must have gone foot. Foot. P-H-U-T, foot. If he suddenly found out that his uncle had been murdered within a few minutes of his leaving him, after, perhaps, a rather stormy interview, well, he might get the wind up and clear right out. Men have been known to do that, act guiltily when they're perfectly innocent. Yes, that is true, said Poirot. But we must not lose sight of one thing. I know what you're going to say, I remarked. Motive. Ralph Patton inherits a great fortune by his uncle's death. That is one motive, agreed Poirot. One? Maui. Do you realize that there are 3 separate motives staring us in the face? Somebody certainly stole the blue envelope and its contents. That is one motive, blackmail. Ralph Patton may have been the man with who blackmailed Mrs. Ferrars. Remember, as far as Hammond knew, Ralph Patton had not applied to his uncle for help of late. That looks as though he were being supplied with money elsewhere. Then there is the fact that he was in some, scrape, which he feared might get to his uncle's ears. And finally, there is the one you have just mentioned. Dear me, I said, rather taken aback. The case does seem black against him. Does it? Said Poirot. That is where we disagree, you and I. 3 motives. It is almost too much. I am inclined to believe that, after all, Ralph Patton is innocent. Chapter 14. So Poirot and Dr. Shepherd are comparing notes, and Poirot is trying to show Shepherd, the thoughts behind the thoughts. Pretty great. Chapter 14, Mrs. Ackroyd. After the evening talk I had just chronicled, the affair seemed to me to enter on a different phase. The whole thing can be divided into 2 parts, each clear and distinct from the other. Part 1 ranges from Ackroyd's death on the Friday evening to the following Monday night. It is the straightforward narrative of what occurred, as presented to Hercule Poirot. I was at Poirot's elbow the whole time. I saw what he saw. I tried my best to read his mind. As I know now, I failed in this latter task, though Poirot showed me all of his discoveries, as for instance, the golden wedding ring. He held back the vital and yet logical impressions that he formed. As I came to know later, this secrecy was characteristic of him. He would throw out hints and suggestions, but beyond that he would not go. As I say, up till the Monday evening, my narrative might have been that of Poirot himself. I played Watson to his Sherlock. But after Monday our ways diverged. Poirot was busy on his own account. I got to hear of what he was doing, because in King's Abbot you get to hear of everything. But he did not take me into his confidence beforehand, and I, too, had my own preoccupations. On looking back, the thing that strikes me most is the piecemeal character of this period. Everyone had a hand in the elucidation of the mystery. It was rather like a jigsaw puzzle to which everyone contributed their own little piece of knowledge or discovery. But their task ended there. To Poirot alone belongs the renown of fitting those pieces together in their correct place. Some of the incidents seemed at the time irrelevant and unmeaning. There was, for instance, the question of the black boots. But that comes later. To take things strictly in chronological order, I must begin with the summons from Mrs. Ackroyd. She sent for me early on Tuesday morning, and since the summons sounded an urgent one, I hastened there, expecting to find her in extremis. The lady was in bed, so much did she concede to the etiquette of the situation. She gave me her bony hand and indicated a chair drawn up to the bedside. "Well, Mrs. Ackroyd," I said, "and what's the matter with you?" I spoke with that kind of spurious geniality which seems to be expected of general practitioners. "I'm prostrated," said Mrs. Ackroyd in a faint voice. "Absolutely prostrated. It's the shock of poor Roger's death. They say these things often aren't felt at the time, you know. It's the reaction afterwards. It is a pity that a doctor is precluded by his profession from being able sometimes to say what he really thinks. I would have given anything to be able to answer, 'Bunkum.' I guess that's modern humbug. Instead, I suggested a tonic. Mrs. Ackroyd accepted the tonic. One move in the game seemed now to be concluded. Not for a moment did I imagine that I had been sent for because of the shock occasioned by Ackroyd's death. But Mrs. Ackroyd is totally incapable of pursuing a straightforward course on any subject. She always approaches her object by tortuous means. I wondered very much why it was that she had sent for me. "And then that scene yesterday," continued my patient. She paused as though expecting me to take up a cue. "What scene?" "Doctor, how can you? Have you forgotten? That dreadful little Frenchman or Belgian or whatever he is, bullying us all like he did. It has quite upset me, coming on the top of Roger's death." "I'm very sorry, Mrs. Ackroyd," I said. "I don't know what he meant, shouting at us all like that. I should hope I know my duty too well to dream of concealing anything. I have given the police every assistance in my power." Mrs. Ackroyd paused, and I said, "Quite so." I was beginning to have a glimmering of what all the trouble was about. "No one can say that I have failed in my duty," continued Mrs. Ackroyd. "I am sure Inspector Raglan is perfectly satisfied. Why should this little upstart of a foreigner make a fuss? A most ridiculous-looking creature he is, too, just like a comic Frenchman in a review. I can't think why Flora insisted on bringing him into the case. She never said a word to me about it, just went off and did it on her own. Flora is too independent. I am a woman of the world and her mother. She should have come to me for advice first." I listened to all of this in silence. "What does he think?" "What does he think? That's what I want to know. Does he actually imagine I'm hiding something? He positively accused me yesterday." I shrugged my shoulders. "It is surely of no consequence, Mrs. Ackroyd," I said. "Since you are not concealing anything, any remarks he may have made do not apply to you." Mrs. Ackroyd went off on a tangent after her usual fashion. "Servants are so tiresome," she said. "They gossip and talk amongst themselves, and then it gets round, and all the time there's probably nothing in it at all." "Have the servants been talking?" I asked. "What about?" Mrs. Ackroyd cast a very shrewd glance at me. It quite threw me off balance. "I was sure you'd know, Doctor, if anyone did. You were there with Monsieur Poirot all the time, weren't you?" "I was." "Then of course you know. It was that girl, Ursula Bourne, wasn't it? Naturally. She's leaving. She would want to make all that trouble she could. Spiteful, that's what they are. They're all alike. Now, you being there, Doctor, you must know exactly what she did say. I'm most anxious with no wrong impression should get about. After all, you don't repeat every little detail to the police, do you? There are family matters sometimes. Nothing to do with the question of the murder, but if the girl was spiteful, she may have made out all sorts of things." I was shrewd enough to see that a very real anxiety lay behind these outpourings. Poirot had been justified in his premises. Of the 6 people around the dinner table that night yesterday, Mrs. Ackroyd at least had something to hide. It was for me to discover what that something might be. "If I were you, Mrs. Ackroyd," I said brusquely, "I should make a clean breast of things." She gave a little scream. "Oh, Doctor! How can you be so abrupt? It sounds as though, and I can explain everything so simply." "Then why not do so?" I suggested. Mrs. Ackroyd took out a frilled handkerchief and became tearful. I thought, Doctor, that you might put it to Monsieur Poirot, explain it, because it's so difficult for a foreigner to see our point of view, and you don't know, nobody could know, what I've had to contend with. A martyrdom, a long martyrdom. That's what my life has been. I don't like to speak ill of the dead, but there it is. Not the smallest bill, but it had all to be gone over. Just as though Roger had a few miserly hundreds of a year instead of being, as Mrs. Hammond told me yesterday, one of the wealthiest men in these parts. Mrs. Ackroyd paused to dab her eyes with the frilled handkerchief. Yes, I said encouragingly. You were talking about bills. Those dreadful bills. Oh, you were talking about bills. Those dreadful bills, and some I didn't like to show to Roger at all. They were things a man wouldn't understand. He wouldn't have said the things weren't necessary, and of course they mounted up, and they kept coming in. She looked at me appealingly, as though asking me to condole with her on this striking peculiarity. It's a habit they have, I agreed. And the tone altered, became quite abusive. I assure you, Doctor, I was becoming a nervous wreck. I couldn't sleep at nights, and a dreadful fluttering round the heart. And then I got a letter from a Scotch gentleman. As a matter of fact, there were 2 letters, both Scotch gentlemen. Mr. Bruce McPherson was one, and the other was Colin MacDonald. Quite a coincidence. Hardly that, I said dryly. They are usually Scotch gentlemen, but I suspect a Semitic strain in their ancestry. £10 to 10,000 on a note of hand alone, murmured Mrs. £10 to 10,000 on note of hand alone, murmured Mrs. Ackroyd reminiscently. I wrote to one of them, but it seemed there were difficulties. She paused. I gathered that we were just coming to delicate ground. I have never known... Oh, sorry. I gathered that we were just coming to delicate ground. I have never known anyone more difficult to bring to the point. You see, murmured Miss Ackroyd, it's all a question of expectations, isn't it? Testamentary expectations. And though, of course, I expected that Roger would provide for me, I didn't know. I thought if I only could glance over a copy of his will, not in any sense of vulgar prying, but just so that I could make my own arrangements. She glanced sideways at me. The position was now very delicate indeed. Fortunately, words ingeniously used will serve to mask the ugliness of naked facts. I could only tell this to you, dear Dr. Shepherd, said Mrs. Ackroyd rapidly. I can trust you not to misjudge me, and to represent the matter in the right light to Monsieur Poirot. It was on a Friday afternoon. She came to a stop and swallowed uncertainty. Yes, I repeated encouragingly. On Friday afternoon, well, everyone was out, or so I thought, and I went into Roger's study. I had some real reason for going there. I mean, there was nothing underhand about it, and as I saw all the papers heaped on the desk, it just came to me like a flash. I wonder if Roger keeps his will in one of the drawers of the desk. I'm so impulsive, always was, from a child. I do things on the spur of the moment. He'd left his keys, very careless of him, in the lock of the top drawer. I see, I said helpfully. So you searched the desk. Did you find the will? Mrs. Ackroyd gave a little scream, and I realized that I had not been sufficiently diplomatic. How dreadful it sounds! But it wasn't at all like that, really. Of course it wasn't, I said hastily. You must forgive my unfortunate way of putting things. Of course, men are so peculiar. In dear Roger's place, I should have not objected to revealing the provisions of my will, but men are so secretive. One is forced to adopt little subterfuges in self-defense. And the result of the little subterfuge, I asked. That's just what I'm telling you. As I got to the bottom drawer, Bourne came in. Most awkward. Of course, I shut the drawer and stood up, and I called her attention to a few specks of dust on the surface, but I didn't like the way she looked. Quite respectful in manner, but a very nasty light in her eyes. Almost contemptuous. if you know what I mean. I never liked that girl very much. She's a good servant, and she says ma'am, and doesn't object to wearing caps and aprons, which I declare to you a lot of them do nowadays. And she can say not at home without scruples if she has to answer the door instead of Parker. And she doesn't have those peculiar gurgling noises inside which so many parlor maids seem to have when they wait at the table. Let me see, where was I? You were saying that in spite of several valuable qualities, you never liked Ursula Bourne. No more I do. She's odd. There's something different about her from the others. Too well educated, that's my opinion. You can tell who are ladies and who aren't nowadays. And what happened next, I asked. Nothing. At least, Roger came in, and I thought he was out for a walk, and he said, "What's all this?" And I said, "Nothing, I just came in to fetch punch." And I took punch and went out with it. Not sure what punch is. Bourne stayed behind. I heard her asking Roger if she could speak to him for a minute. I went straight up to my room to lie down. I was very upset. There was a pause. "You will explain to Monsieur Poirot, won't you? You can see for yourself what a trivial matter the whole thing was. But of course, when he's so stern about concealing things, I thought of this at once. Bourne may have made some extraordinary story out of it, but you can explain, can't you?" "That is all?" I said. "You have told me everything." Yes," said Mrs. Ackroyd. "Oh, yes," she added firmly. But I had noted the momentary hesitation, and I knew that there was still something she was keeping back. It was nothing less than a flash of sheer genius that prompted me to ask the question I did. "Mrs. Ackroyd," I said, "was it you who left the silver table open?" I had my answer in the blush of guilt that even rouge and powder could not conceal. What a great line. "How did you know?" she whispered. "It was you, then?" "Yes. You see, there were one or two pieces of old silver, very interesting. I had been reading up on the subject, and there was an illustration of quite a small piece which had fetched an immense sum at Christie's. It looked to be just the same as the one on the silver table. I thought I would take it up to London with me, and when I went, and have it valued. Then, if it really was a valuable piece, just think what a charming surprise it would have been for Roger." I refrained from comments, accepting Mrs. Ackroyd's story on its merits. I even forbore to ask her why it was necessary to abstract what she wanted in such a surreptitious manner. "Why did you leave the lid open?" I asked. "Did you forget?" "I was startled," said Mrs. Ackroyd. "I heard footsteps coming along the terrace outside. I hastened out of the room and just got up the stairs before Parker opened the front door to you." "That must have been Miss Russell," I said thoughtfully. Mrs. Ackroyd had revealed to me one fact that was extremely interesting. Whether her designs upon Ackroyd silver had been strictly honorable, I neither knew nor cared. What did interest me was the fact that Miss Russell must have entered the drawing room by the window, and that I had not been wrong when I judged her to be out of breath with running. Where had she been? I thought of the summer house and the scrap of cambric. "I wonder if Miss Russell has had her handkerchief starched," I exclaimed on the spur of the moment. Mrs. Ackroyd's start recalled me to myself, and I rose. "You think you can explain to Monsieur Poirot?" she asked anxiously. "Oh, certainly. Absolutely." I got away at last after being forced to listen to more justifications of her conduct. The parlor maid was in the hall, and it was she who helped me on with my overcoat. I observed her more closely than I had done heretofore, but it was clear that she had been crying. "How is it," I asked, "that you told us that Mr. Ackroyd sent for you on Friday to his study? I hear now that it was you who asked to speak with him." For a minute the girl's eyes dropped before mine. Then she spoke. "I meant to leave in any case," she said uncertainly. I said no more. She opened the front door for me. Just as I was passing out, she said suddenly in a low voice, "Excuse me, sir, is there any news of Captain Patten?" I shook my head, looking at her inquiringly. "He ought to come back," she said. Indeed, he ought to come back." She was looking at me with appealing eyes. Does no one know where he is? She asked. Do you? I said sharply. She shook her head. No, indeed, I know nothing. But anyone who was a friend to him would tell him this. He ought to come back. I lingered, thinking that perhaps the girl would say more. Her next question surprised me. When do they think the murder was done? Just before 10 o'clock? That is the idea, I said. Between 9:45 and the hour? Not earlier? Not before 9:45? I looked at her attentively. She was so clearly eager for a reply in the affirmative. That's out of the question, I said. Miss Ackroyd saw her uncle alive at 9:45. She turned away and her whole figure seemed to droop. A handsome girl, I said to myself as I drove off. An exceedingly handsome girl. Caroline was at home. She had a visit with Poirot and was very pleased and important about it. I am helping him with the case, she explained. I felt rather uneasy. Caroline is bad enough as it is. What will she be like with her detective instincts encouraged? Are you going around the neighborhood looking for Ralph Patton's mysterious girl? I inquired. I might do that on my own account, said Caroline. No, this is a special thing Monsieur Poirot wants me to find out for him. What is it? I asked. He wants to know whether Ralph Patton's boots were black or brown, said Caroline with tremendous solemnity. I stared at her. I see now that I was unbelievably stupid about these boots. I failed altogether to grasp the point. They were brown shoes, I said. I saw them. Not shoes, James, boots. Monsieur Poirot wants to know whether a pair of boots Ralph had with him at the hotel were brown or black. A lot hangs on it. Call me dense if you like. I didn't see. And how are you going to find out? I asked. Caroline said there would be no difficulty about that. Our Annie's dearest friend was Miss Gannett's maid, Clara, and Clara was walking out with the boots at the Three Boars. The whole thing was simplicity itself, and by the aid of Miss Gannett, who cooperated loyally, at once giving Clara leave of absence, the matter was rushed through at express speed. It was when we were sitting down to lunch that Caroline remarked, with would-be unconcern, about those boots of Ralph Patton's. Well, I said, what about them? Monsieur Poirot thought they were probably brown. He was wrong. They were black. And Caroline nodded her head several times. She evidently felt that she had scored a point over Poirot. I did not answer. I was puzzling over what the color of a pair of Ralph Patton's boots had to do with the case. And that's 2 chapters, and I think I will stop there for this evening. We'll pick it up again probably tomorrow. But anyway, I just want to thank everybody for stopping by. And if you've got any comments or notes or thoughts, feel free to let me know what they are. And have a good night. All right.